Hi. I like talking about Down syndrome because I have a special affection for children and adults with Down syndrome. And I think it all kind of stems from an experience I had 50 years ago when I was working with a population, and one of the little girls I was working with, a cute little girl named Mary, we sent her to first grade, typical first grade, where she did well. This was in 1973, I believe. What's significant about that is that in 1973, I don't know there was another child in the country with Down syndrome who attended public school. 1973 is before many of your parents were even born. But back in 1973, this was prior to what we had, what were called right to education laws. And essentially back then, any child who did not have a measurable educational IQ, all right, if they were not at that level, they were not permitted access to public education. All right, which means back then, brain injured children, CP children, children on the spectrum, didn't attend public school. They were offered nothing. And sadly, children with Down syndrome, they typically didn't even bother to test them. The assumption was they were not educable. So in 1973, have a child attend first grade was a pretty big deal. The only reason we got Mary in first grade was they couldn't deny her because academically she was above all her peers. She read better, she did math better, she spoke well. All right. That's the only reason we got her in. But she's the first of thousands of children with Down syndrome who we have worked with through the decades. And fortunately, we learn more and more and more. We keep raising expectations, we keep raising the bar, and we see the kids do better and better and better. You know, the example of Mary fortunately helped us get the first right to education law passed in Pennsylvania, which then became the model for the rest of the country. So it was individual kids like that that really shook up the system, changed the perception, and started providing more opportunities. You know, watching what's happened in the United States and around the world in intervening years, you know, still tells me that we've got a long ways to go in terms of educating most of the professional world relative to what our children are capable of doing. You know, it's critical that people understand the potential. If you don't perceive the potential, you're not going to provide the opportunities. If you will, the system defines opportunity as doing what is right according to your perception of what the potential is. You change that perception, then you automatically change the opportunities, increase the opportunities. Okay? So the first step really in helping any child with Down syndrome work toward that real potential is raise your level of expectation. Do not perceive your child, any individual child, as having any limitations. From the get-go, you go for it all. The higher the expectations, the higher you raise the bar, pretty much guaranteed the higher level of function you're going to achieve. All right, this is a big deal. All right. The second piece is you've got to understand neuroplasticity. And I would hope by this time you've heard me talk about neuroplasticity before. But neuroplasticity essentially means that we have the potential to affect a lot of change in any individual's brain if we supply that individual brain with specific, appropriate, targeted input and deliver it with sufficient frequency, intensity, and duration. All right? That means we can do a lot, and there are not limitations. All right, but it's going to take time, it's going to take work, and it's going to take dedication to achieve that. You know, you don't do that in a few minutes a day. And generally, the more one-on-one we can provide for the child, the more targeted the input is, the better we're going to do. The next important piece to understand is that children with Down syndrome need to follow the same neurodevelopmental steps as every typical child. Sadly, the perception of those with Down syndrome is they're different in that they don't have to follow normal steps. And often therapists, for example, skip steps. They skip steps relative to mobility. For example, a typical child will crawl on their tummy, then creep on their hands and knees, and then start pulling up, and then start learning to walk. Often, all those steps are skipped. It's tragic. I see therapists teaching little babies to sit, all right? Not crawl, not creep, to sit. Then they go from sitting to standing and walking, missing all of the foundational steps. If you miss the steps, if you skip steps, you are adversely affecting the ultimate outcome. You got to do the pieces. Same kind of things relative to developing speech and language. You've got to look at all of those pieces, foundational pieces, from how the child chews and how they eat and how they breathe, how they hear, all right, how they process information sequentially to put together the pieces to produce the outcomes. Ignoring the pieces produces things like children being taught sign language because people don't know what the pieces are to put together. Right? You've got to address all of those normal developmental pieces. The next significant piece is if we want our children to function well academically, if at all possible, we want to give them a head start, a kickstart. We start laying the foundation for education with babies. Many of our children with Down syndrome, we're teaching them to read and do math when they're 3 years old. We want to give them a head start. All right, so when they're at kindergarten age or first grade age, they're functioning hopefully above their peers. That's often the goal. All right, but the sooner we get it started, generally the better off we're going to be. All right. Another key piece is cognition, if you will, the foundation of maturity, thought, ability to learn, ability to think, talk, function is cognition. We have been at the forefront of developing methodology, tools, and understanding of cognition for 50 years. Right. And again, starting with babies, and as soon as we can get hold of kids, we are doing many, many different things on a daily basis to push and develop cognition. We, if you will, in our toolbox, we have over 3,000 different specific tools that we use, specific techniques and methodologies that we use. Because the more we can be specific and targeted for any individual child, the better job we're going to do at triggering that neuroplasticity and moving them forward. And then the last kind of really big key piece is you have to work with the whole child. We work with children through parents. Parents who are the world's greatest experts on their kids. Because if we're working with a child, we need to know how they sleep. We need to know what they eat. We need to know how they chew, how they drink, how they feed themselves, how they dress themselves, how they entertain themselves. We need to know about their behavior. All right? We need to know all aspects of the child to be able to put together a comprehensive program to help them achieve that potential. It's important to understand that the last thing you want to do as a parent of a child with Down syndrome is to look at all of those individuals with Down syndrome who preceded them. Because where they function is not a reflection of their innate potential. Where they function is a reflection of the opportunities, or if you will, the lack of opportunity. On a final note, one really important message is that as long as we're breathing, neuroplasticity can affect the brain. And as much as we like to start children as young as we can, at any point in their lives, we can intervene and make change. we have a whole group of adults with Down syndrome that we work with. Many who started with us even as adults without any language or low level of function. And I'm delighted to say, even with these adults who are 20, 30, we have one gentleman that started in his 60s. We see that neuroplasticity is still there, and we're still able to affect change, significant change. So wherever your children are, whatever their age is, okay, we can still intervene, and we can still trigger neuroplasticity and affect, hopefully, significant change. Okay, so please look at all of your individual children as still having a lot of potential. Our job is to work together with the family and help the kids achieve that potential. I'd encourage you to watch our whole video series we have on Down syndrome, read our articles, and if what we're doing makes sense to you, if it sounds good, and if you're ready to really put in the time, we'd be happy to help. We love seeing these individuals do well. Love seeing happy families, happy kids. Okay, good luck. Thank you.